In July 1861, a Union army marched south toward Virginia, confident it would crush the rebellion in a single battle. Watching them come were the soldiers of the new Confederacy, outnumbered, under-equipped, many of them barely trained. And yet, by the end of that hot summer day, it would be the Union Army fleeing in panic, and the South celebrating a stunning victory. This is the story of how the Confederacy rose, and why, against all the odds, the South seemed to be winning the war. Let's start with a question that puzzles many people. The North had more than twice the white population of the South. It had the vast majority of the nation's factories, railroads, weapons production, and wealth. On paper, it should have crushed the Confederacy quickly. So how did the South not only survive, but win victory after victory in the first 2 years of the war? The answer lies in a set of real advantages that, early on, outweighed the North's superior resources. The first advantage was the nature of the war itself. The South was fighting a defensive war. It did not need to conquer the North. It only needed to survive, to defend its own territory and outlast the North's will to keep fighting. And defense, in warfare, is generally far easier than attack. The South was fighting on its own ground, familiar country, defending its own homes. The North had to invade, occupy, and conquer an enormous territory. That burden fell on the attacker, not the defender. The second advantage was motivation and morale. The Southern soldier in those early days was fighting with tremendous spirit. He believed he was defending his home, his family, and his independence against a Northern invader. Many Southern men came from a rural culture of hunting and horsemanship, comfortable with guns and the outdoors. And the South produced from the start an extraordinary crop of military talent. Gifted, aggressive commanders who would run rings around their Union counterparts. The third advantage, in the East at least, was leadership. While the North cycled through cautious, hesitant, or simply incompetent generals in its main Eastern Army, the South had Robert E. Lee, the daring Stonewall Jackson, and others who were bold, skilled, and willing to take risks. This gap in generalship would prove decisive in the early years. The Confederacy's commanders consistently outmaneuvered and outfought larger Union forces, turning the South's disadvantage in numbers into something that, on the battlefield, hardly seemed to matter. All of these advantages were on display in the war's first major battle. In July 1861, the Union Army advanced into Virginia toward a railroad junction at Manassas near a creek called Bull Run. The Northern public was clamoring for a quick victory, an on-to-Richmond triumph that would end the rebellion. So the Green Union Army marched out, followed, incredibly, by crowds of civilian spectators who came to picnic and watch the battle, as if it were entertainment. The first Battle of Bull Run, or First Manassas, was a chaotic clash of two inexperienced armies. At first, the Union attack pushed the Confederates back, but the Southern line held at a crucial moment. And it was here that a Confederate general earned an immortal nickname. As his brigade stood firm against the Union assault, another officer rallied his own wavering men, pointing and shouting that the general was standing like a stone wall. From that day, Thomas Jackson would be known forever as Stonewall Jackson. The Confederates, reinforced and rallied, counterattacked, and the exhausted, disorganized Union Army broke. Its retreat turned into a panicked rout. soldiers and terrified civilian spectators alike streaming back toward Washington in chaos and confusion. The Confederacy had won the first great battle of the war, and the South erupted in jubilation and pride. It seemed to confirm everything Southerners believed, that they could whip the Yankees, that their independence was assured, that the war might be short and victorious. But Bull Run also carried a hidden lesson, one the South would have done well to heed. The victorious Confederate Army was too disorganized and exhausted to pursue the fleeing enemy and finish them off. The chance to deliver a truly crushing blow slipped away. And the battle taught the North a hard lesson too, that the war would be long and serious, and that they needed to build a real army. So Bull Run, for all its glory, did not win the war for the South. It simply began it on a note of Southern triumph. After Bull Run, the war settled into a longer struggle, and the South's confidence soared. The early period seemed to vindicate Southern hopes. The Confederate armies, especially in Virginia, held their own, and more. The dreaded Union juggernaut had been stopped and humiliated. Southern morale was sky high, and the belief in eventual independence ran strong. The new nation was finding its feet, and its armies were winning. But beneath the triumph, the South's deeper weaknesses were already at work, even if few wanted to see them. The South struggled to manufacture its own weapons and supplies. Its railroad network was sparse and would wear out under the strain of war. The Union Navy was beginning to blockade the southern coast, threatening to cut off the trade the South depended on. And the South's smaller population meant that every man lost in battle was harder to replace than for the North. These were slow-acting poisons, not yet fatal, but real. There was also the matter of King Cotton diplomacy, the South's great hope for foreign help. The Confederacy was certain that Britain and France, dependent on Southern cotton, would intervene to secure their supply. But this hope would prove a grave miscalculation. The European powers found other sources of cotton, and they were reluctant to back a slaveholding rebellion, especially as the war increasingly became, in the world's eyes, a war over slavery itself. The foreign rescue the South counted on would never come. Still, in 1861 and into 1862, the South had every reason for optimism, at least in the critical Eastern theater. Its armies were victorious, or holding firm. Its generals were proving brilliant. Its soldiers were fighting with fierce determination. The capital at Richmond stood secure, and the North seemed unable to find a general who could beat the Confederates in Virginia. To Southerners, it looked as though their bid for independence was succeeding. Now, it's important not to overstate this. In the West, along the great rivers of the Mississippi Valley, the story was already going differently. There, Union forces under a determined general named Ulysses S. Grant were winning victories, capturing forts, and pushing into the South. The Western Confederacy was under serious pressure from early on, but it was the East, the war in Virginia, that captured the most attention, and there the South was triumphant. This is the paradox at the heart of the Confederate war effort. The South was poorer, less populous, and less industrialized than the North. By the cold logic of resources, it should have lost quickly. And yet, through superior generalship, defensive advantage, fighting spirit, and the burden the North faced in having to conquer such vast territory, the South not only survived, but won battle after battle. For a time, it genuinely seemed that the Confederacy might achieve its independence through sheer skill and will. And this early success had a profound effect on the Southern psyche, one that would shape the war and the South's memory of it for generations. It bred a deep confidence, even a sense of superiority in Southern arms. It convinced many Southerners that one of their soldiers was worth several Yankees, and that their cause, defended by such valor, must prevail. This confidence would sustain the South through years of hardship, but it would also lead, at times, to overreach and tragic miscalculation. The central figure in the South's rising fortunes was about to take center stage. In the spring of 1862, a massive Union army under McClellan advanced up the Virginia Peninsula and came within sight of Richmond. The Confederate capital itself was in mortal danger. The very survival of the Confederacy seemed at stake, and it was at this desperate moment that Robert E. Lee took command of the army defending Richmond and transformed the war. Under Lee, the outnumbered Confederate army would go on the attack, drive the great Union host away from Richmond, and launch a series of audacious campaigns that would carry Southern arms to the very peak of their success. The reluctant Virginian who had chosen his state over the Union was about to become the most feared commander in America and the symbol of Confederate hopes. The South was rising, and Lee would carry it higher still. So as we close this chapter, picture the Confederacy at the height of its early confidence, victorious at Bull Run, its armies holding firm, its generals brilliant and bold, its soldiers fierce and proud, its capital secure, its independence seemingly within reach. The South had defied the odds and risen as a fighting nation. Yes, the weaknesses were there: the blockade, the shortages, the smaller population, the false hope of foreign aid. But for now, the South was winning, and it believed in its destiny. Next time, from the Southern perspective, we'll witness the legendary partnership that came to embody Confederate brilliance, Lee and Stonewall Jackson, as they drive the Union from the gates of Richmond, win stunning victories against the odds, and carry the Confederacy toward its high water mark.